Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running, State of the Sport.
And this is George Horst, your co-host at Running, State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week we have a great conversation with Mark Milde, race director of the Berlin Marathon on September 24th. Last year, Eliud Kipchoge set the marathon world record in Berlin, and he's returning again this year. So you know the excitement and expectation will be high. Also, Mark fills us in on the history and great traditions of the Berlin Marathon. And did you know that 9,000 American runners are entered at Berlin? Neither did we. A quick note. At the end of the interview with Mark, I say that Berlin will be held on September 17th. That's a mistake. The correct race date is September 24th. That's when you should be ready to follow all the news.
First, Amby, I'm happy to note the publication of an important new running book, Long Run to Glory, the story of the greatest marathon in Olympic history and the women who made it happen, by Stephen Lane. It's about the incredible 1984 Olympic marathon in Los Angeles and all the steps it took to bring the women's marathon to the Olympics. You and I were there, and I think it's fair to say that in our long history of marathons, this has to be one of the most iconic races ever, with the four top marathon runners in the world coming to the race fit, with the possibility that Joan Benoit was a little too close to knee surgery, but she had won the Olympic trials, so it looked like it had everything going into it.
And you know, I believe the next morning you had your own individual race with the now Olympic gold medalist. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's true. I really remember back. First off, as you know, that race where Joni opened up a big lead, and on Greta Weitz, Ingrid Christensen, and Rosa Moda, and she never relinquished it through incredibly difficult conditions in Los Angeles. It was a hot one. And the next day, you're right, I went running with Joni and Jackie Hansen, Scott Samuelson. They were not married yet, he and Joni. I think Craig Virgin might have been part of that running group. And I think we went out, maybe memory is blurring this story a little, but I have a recollection that we ran about 10 miles. And this is after Joni had run this incredible hot weather marathon the day before. And I also recollect that there were times during that when she just was cranking it. I mean, I think she was getting the pace down to 6 minutes a mile. I mean, I've never seen anyone as fierce as she.
You know, I'm glad it was you out there trying to match Joni that day, George, and not me. My particular memory was sitting with all the other journalists in the Olympic Stadium when Joni came in. And of course, we're supposed to be these nonpartisan types, neutrality and all of that. And the truth is, we all had tears in our eyes as Joni came into the stadium, ran her to the tape lap and then her victory lap with the flag. It was just too perfect. It was kind of literally a Hollywood ending that took place with the Hollywood Hills right there in the backdrop. Have you heard any other interesting news this last week or so, George?
Yeah, they had the National 20K Championships in New Haven, and a couple of guys from Utah and Brigham Young took first and second. Clayton Young, whom I knew nothing about, and Connor Mance, who's been running very well, were the two. Both were NCAA champions as track runners, running for our old pal Ed Eyestone at BYU. And of course, Ed himself was a two-time Olympic marathoner. And both of these fellows, Young and Mance, look like they're going to be real threats to make the U.S. team next February in Orlando as we head into the Paris 2024 Olympics. Just as another BYU runner, Jared Ward, made the marathon team back in 2016. And Amby, any other things that caught your attention here?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about smiling, George, and I'll tell you why. We went together to a number of world championships and Olympic games where we would watch the distance runners come out on the track and get ready for their big race, the big race of their career. And you know what? Most of them looked like they were headed for the guillotine. I mean, the word was grim. It looked like it was kind of nasty to be out there, except for one. There was one runner who was always smiling at the starting line, and that was Haile Gebrselassie, of course. And guess what? Who won all those races? Haile Gebrselassie. I think I've actually started noticing now from the recent world champs at Budapest, there are a lot more runners who are at least trying to look happy and relaxed on the start line. And I think that's because their coaches and sports psychologists have really bought into the idea that you don't run well unless you're running happy. And listen, it sounds corny to me. It sounds a little bit too simplistic, but there's actually increasing evidence that it's true. And I really believe there are more athletes embracing it now than ever before. Of course, the queen of smiles in the running world is Courtney Dauwalter. She just won her third 100-miler of the summer. First, she sets a course record at Western States. Then she sets a course record at the Hard Rock 100-miler. And last week at the 106-mile Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, she didn't set a course record, but she won by a huge margin. There is nobody out there like her. There's nobody who can even think of what she just accomplished. And she does it all smiling more than any other runner I've ever seen before. So the word is keep smiling, keep running.
I love it.
This podcast is brought to you by MarathonHandbook.com and RunLongRunHealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free, runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
And Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners. He spends hours searching the internet so you can review the best new content in just minutes.
Now let's turn to this week's guest, Mark Milde, race director of the Berlin Marathon. Mark, many of our listeners know the Berlin Marathon because it's such a famous, super fast race, but we don't know a lot about you. Could you give us some of the details of your life, such as your age, where you're living, where you grew up, and what you do now?
Of course. Well, first of all, thanks, Amby and George, for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure to be invited. And I'll try to tell you a little bit more about me. I just turned the number. I just gotten a year older recently. I'm just about the same age as our marathon. We are holding our 49th edition this year. And we would also always be on the same age, but because of COVID, we lost one edition. So everyone knows now how old I actually am without really mentioning the number. And we are I'm in a way have been a part of this race forever since it has been on. I think I could say, as my father was a founder of the race, and starting in 1974, the club organized this race close to the stadium where the club has been founded. It's the Mommsen-Stadion in Berlin. And the race had its start and finish line there, and we ran out in the woods. And then, obviously, the race grew bigger and bigger. And so I started to be involved in this knowingly. Sometimes in the 80s, when it moved to the city, doing different jobs. And since 2004, I took over the race directorship, if you could say something like that, from my father. Other responsibilities of the CEO went on to my colleagues Jürgen Lock and Christian Jost. But since almost 20 years, I must say, I have been the race director and love every day of my job. We're not just doing this one event. Obviously, the BMW Berlin Marathon is our biggest and marquee event, but we also do other smaller races.
So, Mark, as race director, what do you consider to be your most important responsibilities?
Well, I think the role of race directors on the international scale varies from point to point or from organization to organization. So for me, it might be different than for the others. But in a way, we have to take care of 40,000 plus runners, wheelchair racers, handbikers, inline skater. We have an inline skating division in Berlin. And the most obvious thing is to get everyone safe and sound back to the finish line, to present them a course and the race setup that is safe and without posing a risk to the health and well-being of our runners. And so this is like the basis. And if we can then add other layers to make this race like one of a kind, in terms of for having to be a real quick race. I mean, so we are there for the ordinary runners, but also the elite runners. And in most things, they do get the same experience. Everyone is covering from the start line to the finish line the same course. There are no exceptions. Obviously, we make life for some of the athletes a little bit easier. We give them different access to start areas so they don't have to go all the way like others. But other than that, everyone is treated equally.
It sounds like Berlin has been a father and son marathon to some extent, Mark. Can you tell us a little bit of the beginning story, something about your father, and why did he get involved in launching the Berlin Marathon?
Well, my father, he used to be a runner himself, quite successful with the team it's a distance, a relay race, 3 times 1,000 meters. Together with Bodo Tümmler, he became German champion in that relay. I think his PB is like 2:23. So he was a decent runner, and so he had caught the virus of long distance running while being a student, and somehow it itched him to make running achievable also for others. So in 1964, we organized an open cross-country race here in Berlin together with his university, which supposedly was the first mass race for non-club runners to participate along with club runners. And I think they had like 600 or 700 runners. And then obviously the myth of the marathon is also back in these times was there, and one of his dreams was to organize a marathon, and so he did it in 1974 with the people from the club, and that was the beginning of the story of Berlin Marathon. And when he saw what happened in New York, that was a catalyst to try to move this race from out of the woods. I mean, it was still, for I would say, probably 40% run on concrete, on asphalt. The rest was in the forest. He then took initiative to try to move it into the city. New York was the example, and then, I mean, it's a special situation. Back in the days, the club was situated in the west of Berlin, and there was, after World War II, the British, the French, and the American forces here still in Berlin. And when the French authorities put up a 25-kilometer race in the city, on the streets, he said, hey, if they are able to do it, then we need to be able to do it as well. And so he was able, after a long discussion, to convince the Berlin police. And I think also he had a supporting letter of the former ambassador of the US to Berlin, Mr. Kornblum, that they support this because the course would cut off the checkpoint Charlie, one of the checkpoints where you could change from the west to the east. So that was kind of special. And in the end, he and they succeeded, and 3,000 runners took part in the first race. And since then, steady grow. There was a big jump in 1990, the first year of the unification. We jumped to 25,000 runners, which was big number back then. And afterwards, we were able to plan bigger. And with the second, third, or fourth, I don't know, I stopped counting, running boom, the races got bigger and bigger. And here we are at somewhere between 40 to 50,000 runners.
I have to ask you quickly, is it true that your father won the first race, the first Berlin Marathon? And isn't that a little suspicious?
I must say, I've never heard this rumor. No, that's not true. No.
Okay.
He ran. I think he ran his first marathon was either in New York or in London, 82, 83. So no, that's I don't know where that came from.
You mentioned the influence that New York had, and it's awfully interesting to me the history of Berlin. Tell us a little bit about how the Berlin Marathon is different from New York, Boston, and Chicago, and what makes it so special. Do the runners get a historical tour of Berlin, and how much of it includes the former East Germany in the course?
Well, I mean, we all have in common that we are not shorter than 42,195 meters. But other than that, obviously, we happen to be in different locations. And so our goal was to showcase the city with all it has to offer. I mean, obviously, Berlin has like 3.6 million inhabitants, which is not the biggest in the world. I mean, there are other truly bigger cities, but in a way, Berlin covers a lot of ground. So the city suburbs are quite big, and obviously we can't run into everyone. We can't show the whole city, but we're trying to show the green heart of Berlin in the Tiergarten, where we have the start and the finish. We race through the areas where the Berlin and German government is sitting. We are running into the former East in the areas where the normal people, I would say, are living. We run close to buildings which were put up in the 60s, 70s, where they were called Plattenbauten here, where the lower income people would work. We run then back into the city of former Berlin West, where there are areas with a lot of immigration history. Then we go into the areas where the better off people are living. We run through the Kurfürstendamm, which is a former shopping street, number one for Berlin. And then we hit a place which was kind of the nowhere land in the middle of Berlin, which has been rebuilt in the 1990s and early 2000 years. And before we come into the historic part of Berlin, Mitte, where Berlin was founded. So we're trying to cover all these areas and having in mind that we still want to produce, which has been famous for Berlin in the recent decades, to be one of the fastest or the fastest race. So it is, I mean, if we would design here a course in Berlin, which is purely about speed, it would look different from what we have here at the moment. But again, I mean, it's not just put or produced or laid out for the elites. It's like for everyone. And therefore we have we came up with a race which just works great for most everyone, and then we are trying also to make the course running worthwhile. I think we organize 70 to 80 bands along the course. And then obviously people show up without knowing us. So it's like big city marathoning you can find all over the world. And it just happens that most of the Berliners, I mean, not everyone likes us, but most of them or many of them embrace what we are doing. And so they produce a great atmosphere along the course.
Mark, you've talked about the growth of the race a bit already. Tell us exactly how big is it now? Do you want it to be bigger someday? Is it one of those races that's incredibly difficult to get into? And I'm curious if many Americans come over to run Berlin.
So we are, our record is, I mean, the hard currency, you will, for the big city marathons is a number of finishers. Right. I mean, the number of signups is maybe not the most concrete thing because, I mean, people would not show up for various reasons. So it's the finishers. And our record is from 2019. We had 44,000 finishers. And this is something we were able to handle quite well. And we think we can increase on that, probably not in big jumps. So I'm not going to see us to go to 54,000 runners, but I think we can get that our course and everything, the infrastructure we have can accommodate 50,000 runners. So I don't know when we are going to do this, but this is what we can do. And American runners, we've seen great upswing from the participation. Many years ago, the Danish runners living in the north of Germany were our number one country. But I think since 2018, 19, back then we had 5,000 Americans. And for this year's race, we have signed up 9,000
Wow.
US Americans, followed by, I think, like 2,000 Mexicans, 1,000 Brazilians, 3,000 British runners. So we are quite a truly international race, one can say.
9,000 Americans. That's really fantastic.
It might be, I mean, I don't know the numbers at the moment, but I think we might be in the top 10 of the American marathons, I think, alone with this number.
With that number, you would be. I'm quite sure of it. So, Mark, let me ask you your thoughts on the state of the sport of the Berlin Marathon. What's going really well? What's good? And what could you improve?
Well, we are always thriving to improve. I think we are putting up a a decent race or a great race, a fast race. We've been talking about this a little bit. So this is one of our, I mean, we used to have the slogan flat, fast, and unforgettable, which we think, or I think, is still a good description of what we are doing here. But we're also trying to make the runner's journey quite emotional. So we are doing a lot of work in our, and I think that sets us a little bit apart also from our colleagues of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. What we are doing at the start line or before the start, we have a digital start gate, and also in the starting area where the runners are waiting to get going, several big screens where we produce a show for them to really get into the mood to be running and be ready for the next couple of hours they need to cover the course. And also, as we are starting in 4 waves, to have a most efficient flow on the street, so to minimize traffic jams for the runners, that we are trying to so we have 4 waves, and in between the waves, our start announcer has developed a certain ways to entertain the crowds. So everyone would join in certain things, and it really uplifts the atmosphere at the start, and you get really emotional. And so that's, I think, kind of unique for Berlin, because I haven't seen it done in any other races so far. And then we are trying to, I mean, get a better understanding, or to work on having a more sustainable background for the race, that we try to work on several things to make the race more sustainable in the future, so we can have a good feeling in putting up this race.
Well, you just got me excited to come run Berlin, because I like the idea of this kind of pregame show for the runners that you seem to be putting on while they're waiting for the start. We know that can be an anxious and sometimes a long time, so it's great that you're entertaining them. Berlin's obviously a key member of World Marathon Majors, which seems to be changing a little bit. I won't characterize it, but stuff has happened in the last year. I'm wondering how you feel World Marathon Majors works for Berlin and what they contribute, and if you would like to see some changes.
I think that joining World Marathon Majors gave us certainly a background for, no, not really a background, but it put us in the mind of marathon runners, which might have overlooked us in the past. So to say that, I think we draw from the New York. I mean, everyone of the world, well, many runners in the world want to go. They know about the myth of New York City and its marathon, and so I think for us it opened up the way to the Americas. I mean, not only to have the Americans running in Berlin, but also like runners from Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. So I think since joining them, or the World Marathon Majors, we've seen more runners from that region to come our way, and especially with a bigger promotion of the 6-star finisher medal, we gave the average runner something great to achieve or to aim for. And I think that a lot of these American runners that I mentioned, and we are happy to host them here in Berlin, that they are also on this journey to get this medal. And at the Abbott World Marathon Majors, we realized that this is a big driving force of the series, that people want to be part of it, and to get this medal, and to get the recognition that goes along with it. So when we started the World Marathon Majors, it was a lot about the elite runners, and having them in a series, and having their placings in the races and then put them up into a worldwide ranking. And we saw that we did not catch so much the interest or the imagination of these combined series. So we changed a little bit the focus on that and are now concentrating on making it more entertaining or more worthwhile for the so-called average runner.
So, Mark, earlier you mentioned that with the missed year, next year you'll be celebrating the 50th running of Berlin. And what special plans do you have for that?
Well, there are special plans in place and or being furtherly developed, but it is something that I cannot openly discuss or let you know right now. But I would want to invite you to be open for what is coming, and I think it will be a race to be remembered. And I'm sorry I cannot say much more in that.
I understand. I'm sure there's a lot of planning, and you want to roll out the announcement in a way that works for you.
Sure. Yeah. So we're gonna start the registration process early October, and I think we're gonna be open for 6 weeks, and then I think we will let more out of what's going to happen in that time.
Well, we'll certainly be back to you, Mark, in a year to ask again what's going on, and then you will be able to tell us all about it.
Of course.
Anybody who follows the Berlin Marathon notices that a certain athlete by the name of Eliud Kipchoge seems to keep coming back to Berlin. Why does that happen? Is it just because you pay him a lot, or are there other considerations for Eliud?
I think we pay him a decent amount of money. I don't know what he says about it, but and I would expect that other races might be paying more for him. But in the end, it worked out to be a good combination for both of us. We are, I think, we were his second marathon he ever run. Hamburg Marathon was his first marathon. I think it's good for him to be in a position or like to race in a place where there's no time difference. I think there's like 1 hour difference between Kenya and Berlin. So he doesn't need much time to adapt, and he can really concentrate and focus on his upcoming race. And I wouldn't say that he knows every corner of Berlin, but he knows us as an organization that we go the extra mile for our elite athletes to have them feel comfortable from the moment they step out of the plane and enter our country. We put him in a BMW and take him to our hotel where he's being treated. He knows all his training grounds in Berlin, and so it is. I think he mentioned in his own release when he said he's coming to Berlin. It's a special place for him, and so we just have had the advantage that he came here early in his career, and that we kind of grew together and made a lot possible for him. And so he gets his special service of getting drinks from his partner, Bottle Klaus. I think he has been giving the drinks for free to him for a long time. So it has to do with some emotion. And I think he didn't feel well after racing in Boston and having a bad race. The reason they should know better than me, but for me, I could. I mean, obviously, I follow his career for a long time, and I saw that when there was a cold, rainy day, he didn't perform well, and I think he and Boston were just unlucky that it was a rainy day. Otherwise, I think he would have done much different, and then he might have gone elsewhere. But after that, I mean, both of you guys, you are runners, and then if you're not feeling good or didn't have such a big experience, you want to bounce back with a big bang, and then it is an easy idea to say, okay, let's go there where my magic worked every time, and so we ended up in having him here again in Berlin.
Let me ask you, Mark, did you have conversations about Kelvin Kiptum racing Eliud in Berlin?
Yeah, obviously it crossed my mind, but knowing my budget, I knew that this is not a possibility for us in this year.
So following up on that, you've mentioned the budget a couple of times here, and it's pretty clear that you don't have as substantial a budget as New York, Boston, and Chicago. So you've got to be more selective and creative. Is that a fair statement in putting together elite races?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's you can that's the case. Yes, true. I mean, it's still a decent amount. I mean, there we have not to be ashamed of, but I mean, the way these races are structured with certain ways of income, they other races do have a bigger budget.
Mark, there are very few people who have watched Eliud Kipchoge at his best more closely and more often than you because of his many great races at Berlin. What do you think are some of the characteristics that make him such an incredible marathon runner?
Well, I think it is his determination. I mean, he's been around now on the highest level for 20 years. And I think that he is a very careful planner. He has a surrounding of people which help him to grow further his own talents and needs, and which are sensible of how he feels or can see what he needs. And he is I think, I mean, obviously I can see him only in during the races. I mean, I have not seen him in his training camp, and I don't know how he is reacting and working or training there. But I can see that like he is focused. I mean, he usually before a race we have a technical meeting for the elite athletes, and in the first years, I mean, he was sitting front row. I mean, usually first row is deserted at most these occasions or wherever you go, but he came into the room front row, first seat. This is where he was sitting, and so I think he is. If he does something, he's all in, and I think he's going all in with his career. And I mean, knowing other great runners like Haile Gebrselassie, who probably is on par with him with successes, and or maybe even has more records than Eliud will get in his lifetime. But he, in the end, later at the end of his career, he was juggling a company with more than 1,000 employees and still racing hard and running successfully, whereas Eliud, who probably earned similar amounts of money, is just focusing on running. He goes to the training camp, returns at home to see his family, and then he goes back into training camp. So I haven't heard of any other runner leaving at this level, leading such a nomadic life, and therefore he's getting being repaid with his successes on the road and that incredible times that he's running.
Do you think you have pacers? Of course, some of the other Abbott World Marathon Majors don't have pacers. Is that an added attraction for Eliud in Berlin? And is there any controversy in Europe around having pacers for a big championship race like Berlin?
No, I mean, we've been working with pacemakers since a long time, and I think it is kind of the way how different races set different narratives. And I mean, I can understand that for New York, because of the nature of the course, it is difficult to compete 4 times. I mean, it's naturally much harder for them with the bridges in between, and therefore it might just be the more exciting race to see the runners run together until the finish line. I mean, it is not always the case. I mean, although we set up races with pacers, we did have some dramatic finishes running of competitors running close to the Brandenburg Gate together, and in the end, only one can win. So it is just a different nature and the way how these races have developed, and there are certain rules set out by the governing body, World Athletics, which we are following, and therefore it is some people I mean, different flavors. People like different flavors, and therefore you can either go right or left. And we chose to do it with the pacers, and we are not concerned about this or have an initiative to think about a change in that respect.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. I think each of these marathons has its own very distinctive characteristics, and yours is clearly super fast. And we talk a lot about the fast flat conditions. The other thing about Berlin is generally at the time that you come in September, I think the history has proven it out. You generally have had good race conditions as well. I remember, Mark, the only time I ran Berlin, I think, was 2005, and it was one of your warm days. But normally, it's really picture perfect for runners.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, that is something obviously we can't control other than sending prayers, and it has been good with us. Not sure how it will play out this year, but we're having fingers crossed, and we're gonna clean all our plates. And I mean, that is saying here in Germany that if you eat everything which you have on the plate on the table, then the weather is going to be good on the next day. So that is something we have to do and are working, that all the elite athletes are doing this. And I mean, obviously, George, I remember you running here in Berlin, and it was a warmer day, but maybe that was also why you had a special fan at on the course.
Martin Gruning.
Do you remember what happened there?
I certainly remember Martin Gruning ran with me, the editor of Runner's World Germany, a dear friend of mine, and I was paced, so I can't complain about pacers. He ran with me the whole way.
Yeah.
What were you saying? Did I remember specifically?
I think there was some incident along the course that you had a special person to cheer you on.
Oh, yes. Was he doing commentary, or did he just happen to rush out on the course?
No, I think it was a person with a diverse background, I would say. I mean, I can't remember exactly the story, but it was. We had some good laughs about it.
It was one of your former great runners. Yeah. Speaking of that, we haven't had great German marathon runners in a while. And what's going on there?
I mean, the level, especially for the women, has increased by quite a bit internationally on the international scale. We do have a solid base, I would say. Will be a big hunt for the tickets for Paris Olympic Games here in Berlin. So there's a good base, but there's no outstanding athlete at the moment. I mean, there's one or two in the pipeline. I mean, Coro Constanze Klosterhalfen, she might be the next one to break 220 again for the German runners. And on the men's side with Amanal Petros, who has a 206 PB, which is strong time. Obviously, the German record. He might do something better in Berlin as he's racing here for the first time as well. So yes, I mean, we're not there where we were like in the 1990s when Uta Pippich and Katrin Dörre-Heinig were winning some of the major marathons, or Irina Mikitenko. It might just be that slowly we're gaining traction again.
Mark, I can't believe we've lasted this long and haven't asked you the personal question. How about your own running? Do you run marathons? And what are your thoughts on running, exercise, fitness for personal well-being?
Yeah, I think, yes, I am a runner. I ran so far 5 marathons, and my PB is 250, which is okay. I try to pronounce all the time 215, that people might think I'm also one of the fastest runners, but then I obviously tell the truth. I mean, my running is not so strong in recent years. I'm trying to stay fit in doing some biking. I also did some triathlon back in the days, and at the moment I'm in the summer I turn up to do swim run, which is a combination of swimming and running, which we also have an event here in Berlin, which is like a perfect combination in summer when you have to swim and run and changing like 5 times. So you swim with your running shoes, and it's a really fun event. And so I'm still in the endurance sports sector, but I'm not running marathons on a yearly basis anymore.
Mark, this will be our last question for you. If we could give you a fairy godmother who would grant you 3 wishes for Berlin Marathon Day this September, what would your 3 wishes be?
I think, although we have had a good history of the good weather you already mentioned, I think the weather would be my number 1 priority. Other than that, everyone would arrive safe and sound back at the finish line, and hopefully also before the cut-off time, and that we and all the runners do have the time of their life to become a Berlin legend, which we think is something that hopefully everyone who have been here relate to, and think that he's taking his personal experience from Berlin back home to wherever he comes from, and so that we can remain in the hearts and in the memories of all these runners.
Mark, if we give you a really nice fairy godmother, wouldn't you like a world record?
Yeah, obviously, of course. Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's kind of the icing of the cake. I mean, I wouldn't say no. And
nobody would.
Obviously, it's a good competition with our colleagues in Chicago. I mean, I know that 2 weeks later there is a great field also there. Maybe we can raise the bar a little bit further, and then it's up to Kerry and the Bank of America Chicago Marathon to do even more. But I think that's also, I mean, this is what running and track and field is about: faster, quicker, wider. So yeah, I mean, that would be it would be the great final of a hopefully great marathon weekend in Berlin.
Mark Milde, thank you so much for joining us today and telling us so much about the Berlin Marathon. And we do hope that you have all your wishes come true on September 17th.
Thank you, Amby. Thank you, George, for having me on the show. It was my pleasure, and hoping to see you in our little world of running somewhere soon.
For sure. Thanks, Mark.
George, I felt like we really learned a lot about the Berlin Marathon from Mark Milde. What were some of your biggest takeaways?
Yeah, for me, Mark brought back a lot of memories. I ran the race once in 2005 when I was 71. And I had been told that, of course, it's a super fast course, which we know it is, but also that you get the added benefit of almost always very cool weather late in September in Berlin. And in my year, I didn't hit it right. It was one of those days where pretty soon into the race, we were into the 70s, and then it got up even hotter than that. And I know that doesn't happen often, but it didn't take anything away from the beautiful course. It's historic, and it goes through, East Germany, the Brandenburg Gate, of course, the Tiergarten, and so much of that spectacular architecture that you find in Berlin.
I've never run Berlin, but my mother actually grew up in the shadows of the famous 1936 Olympic Stadium in Berlin. So, of course, Mark got me really excited with all his descriptions of the race, and particularly the fact that next year will be their 50th running. He's got some big plans coming up. He couldn't tell us yet. He said he's got to hold off for a few months. But while he was talking, I was thinking to myself, oh man, it would be really great to be running in Berlin next fall. What else did you learn from Mark?
Well, of course, we all know that Eliud Kipchoge set the world record last year in Berlin, a 2:01:09, pretty speedy stuff. And that he had a very disappointing run this year in Boston. His overall marathon career is unparalleled. But there was always the question at Eliud's age, and that is how much longer can he keep it going? And we've got Paris, the Olympics coming up next summer, and his quest to be the first person to win 3 straight Olympic marathons. So I think all eyes, of course, as always, will be on him. He's very comfortable, very at home. He's got pace setters, which he didn't have in Boston. He's got that super fast course. And we'll see. I mean, aging sooner or later gets to every great athlete, as we know. The question is, how much time is left for Eliud?
Well, I know we'll all have our eyes on him in Berlin this fall, seeking an answer to the question you just raised. And many of us, I think, would love to see him go all the way through Paris and to grab that 3rd Olympic gold medal. That would just be incredible. I want to end by admitting my embarrassment over something that I asked Mark Milde. I asked him, it was more or less a statement. I said, tell us the story about your father, Horst, winning the first Berlin Marathon. And he was a bit confused for a moment, but he said, no, that's completely erroneous. And of course it is. And of course, when I look back over my notes, I realized that I had probably asked an artificial intelligence chatbot for a little bit of information on the Milde family. And boy, did I get a bad hallucination from that chatbot. So I think the moral here is I better be a lot more careful about my research in the future. You can get a lot from those AI instruments, but you can't trust a word of it. So I'll be careful next time.
That's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode.
Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.